Hey guys, it's Miss Keenum here again, and today we're going to talk about adding and subtracting fractions using line plots. So this is going to be part 3 or video 3 of our 3-video series on line plots. If you missed part 1, which was constructing line plots and just an overview of what they are, or if you missed part 2, which was interpreting data from line plots, you can go back and watch those videos if needed. If not, let's get started. Okay, so today, or this first section, we're going to talk about adding fractions. So we can add fractions using line plots. And so the line plot, remember, shows the frequency or the number of times something occurs. So for example, right here, 2.5, we're showing that we have 3 somethings that occur 2.5 times, or 3 somethings that measure 2.5. So what I can do in my head is I can take away those X's, or I can take a sheet of paper and I can cover those X's, or I can take my hand and I can cover those X's. But essentially what we're going to do when we're adding fractions on the line plot is we're going to take away those X's and we're going to look at this as a number line. So my question says 1/4 plus 3/4 equals what? So I need to first look at my number line and determine how it is broken up. So I can look here and I'm going to count the number of spaces between each mark to know how my number line is broken up. Okay, so I have 1 space, 2 spaces, 3 spaces, and 4 spaces before I hit my whole number 1. So this tells me that my number line is divided into fourths. So I have 1/4, and then a half, which is 2/4, and I have 3/4 before I hit my whole number 1. If I had counted 3 spaces, my number line would have been divided into thirds. If I had counted 8 spaces, my number line would have been divided into eighths. But this one is divided into fourths, which is good because our question is asking us 1/4 plus 3/4. So if I don't know how to add 1/4 plus 3/4 in my head, or I don't know how to add it writing it out on paper, I can count it on a number line. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to find where my 1/4 is. And for me, I'm going to draw a line above the 1/4. So right here is 1/4. So I have 1/4. Now I'm going to add 3/4 to that. So to add 3/4, I'm going to pick back up where my 1/4 was, and I'm going to count over 3 lines. So here's 1 line, here's 2 lines, and here's 3 lines. So that's 3/4. So now I add that. So what number am I at on this line? I'm at 1. My total 1/4 plus 3/4 equals 1 whole. So my answer is 1. Now, if I knew how to add that, I could have just added that by saying 1/4 plus 3/4 equals 4/4, which equals 1 whole. Okay, let's keep going. Okay, so now my new problem is 1.5 plus 2 equals what? So once again, I can take away the X's by using a sheet of paper, by just imagining they're not there or covering them with my hand, and I'm left with the pure number line. So now what I'm going to do is, once again, second, I'm going to determine how is my number line broken up. So this number line's the same one we just have, but it's broken up into fourths. So I count my spaces. 1, here's 2, 3, and 4 spaces. So I know that my number line is broken into fourths. 1/4 plus 2/4, which is 1/2, and then 3/4. Okay, so as I did last time, I'm going to find my 1.5, which is right here. And I'm going to draw my initial line from 0 to 1.5. Okay, then I'm going to add 2. So to add 2, I can look at this and I can say, well, I know 1.5 to 2.5 is a whole, so that's 1, but I still have to add 1 more. And I know that 2.5 to 3.5 is a whole, or is 1, so I've added my 2, and I can get my answer that way. So total my line goes to 3.5. So my answer is 3.5. But if I did not know that 1.5 to 2.5 was 1, or 2.5 to 3.5 was 1, I could count my spaces. So we already determined that I need 4 spaces to make one whole. So what I could do is count my spaces. So I know I need 4 spaces to make one whole, which means I need 8 spaces to make 2 wholes. So I would initially start at 1.5, and then I would count 8 spaces over. 1, 2, 3, 4. That gave me my first whole. 5, 6, 7, 8. That gave me my second whole. I ended up, once again, at 3.5 to get the answer. Now, like we said earlier, if I had just known that 1.5 plus 2 equals 3.5, added my whole numbers and then put my fraction in, I could have done that without the number line, and that's perfectly fine. Okay, so now we're going to look at subtracting fractions using a line plot. So for the most part, we're going to be finding the difference between what we have. And in this one, we're going to be using the actual marks or the frequency given from our data set. So this one says, the line plot shows the distance students live from the school in miles. What is the difference in miles between the students who live closest and furthest away? So difference keys me to subtraction. So what is the difference in mile between the students who live closest? Well, what's the closest mileage that I have? It's going to be 5. Okay, so over here on my knowns, I'm going to put 5 miles is the distance closest to the school. Now, who lives the furthest away? Well, I have a 7. That's what my line plot shows, but I have no x's above the 7. So I need to go to this number, okay, or this line. But what's this line representing? So once again, I have to count my spaces between my whole numbers. So I have 1 space, 2 spaces, 3 spaces, 4 spaces. So just like in the last number line, this one is divided into 4. So I know that this one's going to be 6 1/4, 6 1/2, because 2/4 equals 1/2, and then 6 3/4. Well, that got a little sloppy there, but that's okay. So I know that my furthest distance away is 6 3/4. So as my known, I put 6 3/4 for my furthest distance from school. Now I have to solve this. So my equation down here, if I know how to subtract fractions, would be 6 3/4 minus 5. So that's my equation, or my number sentence that I have. Okay, but if I don't know how to do that, I can go to my number line, and just like we used our number line or our line plot for adding, I can use it to subtract. Okay, so I find my biggest number, which is 6 3/4. And I'm going to show it right here. I'm going to draw my line to 6 3/4. All I'm going to do is count my number of spaces since this line plot starts at 5. So I'm going to say I have 1 space, 2 space, 3 space, 4 space, which we said makes a whole, and then I have 1 space, 2 space, and 3 spaces till I get to my 6 3/4. So essentially I'm just counting this blue line because our number plot or a line plot or a number line started at 5. So how many spaces is that? So I counted that I had 7 spaces. Well, 4 spaces makes a whole. And then I have 3 spaces, which is in 4, so I have 3/4. So my answer is 1 3/4 of a mile is the distance between those who live closest and those who lived furthest away. So once again, if I had just done it straight with my fractions, I could have said 6 minus 5 is 1, and then I'm left with the remaining fraction, which is 3/4. Okay. Let's going to be the line plot below shows the distance in miles Carol walked each day. What is the distance in miles between the fewest miles she walked in a day and the most miles she walked in a day? Okay, so the fewest miles, our first known, is 1 mile. Well, I already put it up. The most miles walked in a day is 2.5. Now this one's easy. We have 1 space here, 2 spaces here. So we know that this is divided into halves. Okay, so I want you to figure out what this is. I'll go ahead and write our equation or our number sentence, which is 2.5 minus 1 equals. Now you try to figure out what the answer is going to be before I draw it. Okay, so remember, I'm going to draw a line from my least to my greatest. So from 1 to 2.5. And then I'm going to count those chunks or those spaces. So I have 1 space, 2 space, 3 spaces. Okay, so these 2 make a whole. And then we know this one is a half. So we add that up, the spaces between 1 and 1/2. So that would be our answer, 1.5 miles. Once again, we could have just done the equation where we look at our whole numbers, 2 minus 1 equals 1. And then we add our fraction in there. So that's how we can add and subtract using line plots, or add and subtract fractions using line plots. As before, you can go to this website and find a worksheet to practice. You can check out the below videos for more help. This is what I looked at to make this video, references for the video. Thanks for watching. Also, if you have anything that you would like for me to cover in the future, just leave a comment below and I will try to get to that. Thank you. Bye.